right, good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, whenever you're watching. It's the morning for me for another 10 minutes. Welcome to more Drawin and John. Every time I do this, I always say how I'd like to get this on a more regular scheduled thing, but I haven't, and I probably won't, and I'll come back every now and again and do some drawing with you. But I have been busy. I recently published my comic book, Gut and Ghost, Lights Out. You probably see me working on a few pages on my channel here and there. You can always check those out. And basically, yeah, it's a 9-page story about a pile of guts and a ghost. And their light goes out and they have to change the bulb. And the many roadblocks and, you know, non sequiturs and non-solutions that lead them to hopefully getting the lights turned back on. And it's a 9-page story. I had a lot of fun writing and drawing it. It also includes, you know, some old stuff from the sketchbook archives from years ago, some stuff with thumbnails on here. So if you're interested in process at all, I tried to include a little bit of that on here. And you know, you can always watch some of my videos or reach out to me on Instagram. I'm always happy to talk about stuff like this. You know, what little I do know, I'm happy to share. Includes both of the old covers I used to use for the fold-out zines, as well as 3 one-page comics. The Toilets Creep About, Incinerate, based on Sonic Youth's song Incinerate, and a little diary comic about a recurring thought I would have while making coffee that I now no longer have, probably thanks to this comic and for my brother for sharing his method and that sticking with me. But yeah, if you would like a copy, you can hit up my Shopify. I got a link in the description and a link in my profile. I have a physical version available and a digital version. The digital version is not as expensive as the physical version, although you're not spending a bunch of money on this. Every one of the physical ones I sketch on the back, you know, address it to you, mail it out, so it's a little personalized. And then the digital version, you'll get a straight PDF that you can access on any device that reads PDFs. And I also included the page layouts, so you get the PDF and the page layouts, so you can print your own bootleg Gut and Ghost. Make a new cover for it if you want. Any way you want to do it, I'm not precious with it. But if you do anything fun or cool or unique to it, you know, send me a pic. I'd love to see it. I spent a lot of time on this. Currently working on more Gut and Ghost. I did some on the live stream the other day, but we got a little outline I've been working from and just kind of thumbnailing so I could figure out, you know, what the big pages are going to look like as far as composition and layout. And yeah, we made it to page 8 so far. Many more to come, but today we're going to be working on another portrait drawing with the fountain pen. I went to a local music show last Friday for the band Flower Shopping. They had their EP released. I can't remember the name of it, but it is very good. Time Traveler is a very good song. It's about, like, every song on it, it's very good. I had a lot of fun. And I took some pictures, and as always, I love to draw from pictures, and I'm going to be drawing from one of those tonight. I'm drawing one of their opening acts, Twin Toasters. He did some really kind of intimate, but also kind of goofy and fun, you know, kind of like acoustic songs for his set. Yeah, and it was really enjoyable. I had a great time, and yeah, we're just going to be drawing this, and then, you know, the other thing I want to do is kind of talk my way through the drawing process while doing this. So, you know, some people on my Instagram are curious about that sort of thing, and I love sharing process. So I will be doing my best to articulate as best as I can what exactly is going on in my head as I'm putting these lines down on paper. So first thing we got to do, and I'll flash the picture up so you guys can see, is we need to establish an anchor point. Generally, I start with something in the face, usually the eyes, but there's an interesting shadow that's happening around the eyes. So I might kind of forego that. I mean, we can kind of get the shape of the nose in there, so that might not be a bad way to start. And there is a pretty harsh parallel, or not parallel, almost horizontal line. I guess it'd be horizontal in relation to the XY axis on his face here. that we can maybe start with, but I think I might also kind of map out to, no, let's start with the nose. I'm thinking about starting with the brim of the hat because that would establish the length of the brow, kind of the shape of the skull, and we'd get a little bit of that shape in the round by following the brim of the hat around. But I think the nose might be a better anchor point. So let's start there. So we do got a very harsh shadow here, so we can kind of see, we lay down a little line. You always want to be conservative with your lines, especially at the beginning. You don't want to be scared of it. You don't want to hesitate. But there's nothing wrong with being a little bit conservative when you're approaching something with just ink. Right now, I'm mostly just looking for shapes that will turn kind of into other things, and these anchor points will establish, number one, our proportion for the rest of the drawing as it grows out, and number two, I guess it's really just proportion, but angle, is everything will be in relation to this starting point, even as we branch further out. It all starts where our first anchor point is, which kind of ends up just becoming the focal point of the drawing, because they also generally just kind of start them a little bit in the center. And then what I'm doing here is just some little hatch marks to kind of map out, you know, some just areas of like light shadow. You know, you don't want to, you can always do dotted lines and fill them in later. You can't really take that away. So the other thing to keep in mind when approaching anything with pen is that there is no take backs, and that can be a little daunting, but at the same time, I think it also frees you up to kind of think about all the individual little choices, and it forces you to at some point make those compromises and make those guesses, but you're going to try to do them in as educated a way as possible. So I'm going to shut up for a minute and see if I can get a little bit of that sketched out and kind of just show you what I mean. So at the nose here, and that's kind of where the eye goes. And then we also have here where the tip of the nose is, the microphone kind of coming out, and that's almost parallel to the bottom of the page here. So the microphone, all, like at least the head of the microphone, you know, the part you sing into, is almost parallel. And we want to go down a little bit, not too far down, because we can, again, once this starts curving, you know, I can always bring this out a little bit further in the trajectory that I have, but once I start straightening this out and bringing it back down, I'm kind of locked in for how big that's going to be. So until we get a little bit more information down here, I'm not going to draw any more of that microphone below that point. And then we can do the same thing with this another little band on the microphone head here. And then the other thing that this is doing is we're also keeping an eye on what I've already drawn for the face here and how this relates to parts of the microphone. So it looks like this shadow here stops at about where I have it here. So what we can do, it is a pretty harsh shadow, but I don't like to go full black. I like the kind of textured contour lines, you know, because it's one of those things you can kind of, you're doing line as far as, you know, like an outline of something or putting a boundary on something, but you're also using line to communicate value. And when you have these kind of interesting shapes that the value is creating, you can, it's, I don't know, I find it to be very satisfying to kind of have these like orderly lines that follow the topography, for lack of a better word, of the face. So you can see I'm kind of curving up and in because the cheek curves down like that. And it's ultimately going to kind of curve up if we were to continue drawing these lines to create the area where the kind of the upper jaw meets the eye socket and stuff like that. So we're doing a lot. We're trying to accomplish a lot of things with just a little. if that makes sense. That's always, I think, that's my goal in drawing, at least. I don't want to say that's always the goal in drawing, because there's a lot of ways, there's many different ways to skin a cat. And this is just the way that I do it. But at the same time, I think if you extrapolate a lot of people's methods, you'll find a lot of common things in that Venn diagram of how to draw. We can kind of make that come out a little bit. All right, maybe I don't want to do that just yet. The other thing you can do too is, like, if you know, I always think about these lines as like we're shooting flares out into the night to kind of find form and void, you know, but it's also kind of the opposite of that, because we're working with a black line on white paper. So it's not necessarily flares, it's like a reverse flare, but the principle's still the same, because you're still trying to find form and void. The difference is that you got to keep in mind is the darker things are, the more they recede. And you can't really have these things recede unless you have that lighter contrast to go with it. So it's important, and this is one of the things that I struggled with for a long time, not to overdo the mark making. You know, you want to do just enough. You don't always have to do these hash lines too. You can always kind of like come around and kind of map out like a starting point for these shadows, because there are a lot of like wrinkles on the face and areas where these shadows start and stop. So you can play with a little bit those boundary lines, as well as the and then see, I can already see we need to go a little bit darker here. So again, you can always go darker. You might get some areas that start to become full black, but there's nothing wrong with that, you know. It just indicates that like you got closer together lines, and that's creating an area of deeper value. So let's go back to this microphone. That's the other thing you got to do when you're drawing, is you got to jump around on it a lot. You don't want to overwork one area, because then you can kind of tell when you're done, like, oh, he spent a lot of time on this eye and nothing else is kind of rendered like that in the drawing. So this might end up being like a little bit of a longer video, actually, because I'm talking my way through it. So let's let me just be quiet a little bit and see what I can do, because I feel like I've told you all kind of what the method is here, and it's kind of just you keep on pursuing it like that. So now we have like kind of the side of the face here, and we have a lot of things happening. So we have this shadow comes up, and now that we have that established, we know whereabouts the rim of the hat goes, and this is going to establish its own plane of shadow here, which more or less follows that down. And then this comes around here. See, and like even here, like I just kind of map them out a little bit, and you don't want to use bold strokes. But we do have areas of harsher shadow receding into light, so we can get away with this. So a lot of what you're looking at is like ways you can map it out and then kind of disguise that's what you were doing. Make it work within the lines you've established within the drawing. And this photo is interesting because it has a lot of like mid-tones too. He's lit with kind of a purple light and a blue light. And then some of the blue turns into highlights, but then some of the blue is also kind of like flat too. And where we have this area here where the purple and the blue kind of meet. So we might even be able to do a little bit of a cross-hatching thing here. And again, like I gotta abandon this after this because I don't want to overwork this area. We can always come back to it later and fix it in relation to the rest of the drawing. And then let's see what's kind of the shape of this here coming off. It's a little darker so we can kind of, we don't have to be too precious with that. So it's always a good sign. Like, I'm not entirely sure about this yet, but I always feel like that's a good sign at the beginning of the drawing, is when you're just like, it's not coming together. But it's mostly because we haven't really given it the chance to yet. And let's see, I probably want to, so I'm going to have to disguise that later because I dove in a little bit too quickly. Because what's happening here is we have, yeah, like this line here comes pretty harshly in, and that's kind of where his eyebrow starts. That would be about even with this one here, which is pretty heavily disguised in the shadow. And we'll adjust these values, you know, as we fill out more of the drawing. So yeah, just kind of map that out. We just want little contour lines that we can build on later as we get more of a handle of where all of our features are. And that's the important thing too, is you kind of want to divorce in your mind like what you know a face looks like. Everybody's, you know, you draw the kind of oval shaped saucers or footballs for eyes, and you know there's a pupil in there and eyelashes. He's got his eyes closed, so I mean, yes, I am drawing eyelashes, but I'm also just kind of drawing, again, just like kind of these contrasts and these shapes that when you're all done, because I've been looking at what I'm looking at and I'm kind of divorcing myself from what the object is, should look like what it is. Because I think when you get too focused on what it's supposed to be versus what it actually looks like, that's when you're not really looking at it anymore. You know, you're looking at this image in your mind. You're not looking at the picture in front of you. Or your subject. I mean, ideally drawing from life is the best, but I mean, I think any drawing you can do from a reference photo or any sort of reference that you might have is good. And it's not often you get to do, you know, kind of life drawing stuff outside of a classroom setting. So you gotta take what you can get. So this is where we got some hair coming in. And this is where we're gonna have to start being bold around here, because we have this, not like a big area of void, but what's gonna inform this is by finishing this out. So let's go back to this microphone. And we're gonna start drawing things in relation to the microphone. So we can make this come down a little more. I think we got enough information. We can make a bigger guess about that. And that's what this is. Drawing is not going to be exact. We're not taking a picture here. I already took the picture, you know. Now I'm using the picture to kind of study the way light plays, the angle of the skull. Like, there's a lot of things you can kind of get out of it from drawing either from life or from a photograph. The reason why life drawing is a little bit more ideal is because it requires a certain amount of presence, whereas I can get up and walk away from this photo. I can hit pause on this video and come back to it later and pick up then. But life drawing requires like a little bit more of a discipline. You know, the models can only sit there as long as they can take it, as still as they can. There's going to be things that change that you're going to have to just compensate for, or just be like, you know what, I drew it this way, but then this moved, and that kind of changes the rest of this pose for me. But then that's when it becomes a problem solving thing, you know, which is where it gets really interesting. And I think that's where you kind of start to grow as somebody that wants to, you know, be able to draw, if you're at all interested in the craft of drawing. Because it's one of those things that happens a lot up in your head. And, you know, it's this connection between the eyes, the brain, and the hand. And in the case of life drawing, you know, it's very much tied to a series of very specific moments. And the artifact that you get, the drawing, is kind of evidence that I was here. I was paying attention as much as I could, not only to my surroundings, but to myself. And where things were zigging, here's where I zagged. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's very much a collaborative thing without much, you can do it without audibly communicating. You can always ask the model politely, like, oh, hey, do you mind putting your arm back this way, or blah, 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 if you were in the middle of something. I mean, there's some audible communication that happens, but I don't know. I'm never one to request that a model does something. I'm just there to, I don't know, I've only ever been there in a student, like doing live drawing in like a student kind of capacity. So it wasn't up to me what the model did. It was up to the model and, the instructor of the classroom. So here we go. This is where doing this is going to inform this side. So we got the mouth, we got the jaw. We know this comes around here, and he's got some 5 o'clock shadow here that we can kind of use not only as value, number one, but also as texture, and we can use it as contour to kind of map out the direction that this all kind of moves at. And it's all pretty, what do you call it? Evenly textured throughout this area. There are areas where this is going to go darker, but again, we can come in with line and get that mapped out. But let's do the texture first. So that way we got a little bit of something that we can kind of anchor onto. It looks like it comes up to about right here. Nothing wrong with kind of just going on the outside here and just kind of mapping this out. And then now we know this is about where the sideburns and the long hair tucked behind the ear go. So this might end up being a longer video because I'd like to get this drawing done in one sitting. And again, we're not concerned with what does an ear look like. It's what are these series of shapes that are happening that I can just map out against the contrast of what is around it. Drawing line where I'm able, because he's got some hair coming down here. And see, now we can make a couple of bold marks since we have some of this mapped out. And some of this is actually going to end up being like this shadow kind of leads up to where the hair juts out. And we don't want to go too bold. We don't want to go too far down, but we can always layer more on top. And we also have coming down off of the jaw here, this kind of interesting dark shape that the hair is creating, which is going to give us contrast for this harsher line here. So we're not wrong in having drawn that line, but we can do things like maybe make the lines that make the shadow go with the flow of the hair and kind of lead into that, if that makes sense. If you guys can kind of pick up what I'm putting down there. And I don't, hopefully twin toasters will get a kick out of this too. How to draw twin toasters, I guess, is the tutorial I'm putting on. But it's not necessarily how to draw twin toasters. It's just my approach to diving right into a drawing with pen. And, same rules apply for any, I think even with pencil, you can do this with pencil too. The difference is that you do have an eraser on your pencil. So it's not as, I didn't just start drawing with pen. I used to do, and I still do underdrawings. Like for my comic, I'll do underdrawings and stuff because you know, there's a lot of, especially with drawing from imagination, there's a lot of, you know, that's more guesswork, for what I feel like, because I don't have something in front of me to reference specifically. Whereas a photograph, I feel like I can just take my time with. Same thing with kind of life drawing. You can kind of settle in. You don't necessarily want to take your time with life drawing, but you also want to get yourself in a mode to where you're relaxed, you're not rushing, but you're giving yourself time to look, and you have to keep in mind that what you're also needing to do is make a decision as for like, what are you going to do with that time you took to look? What decision are you going to make? Where are you going to put that line down? What's going to be your anchor point? You know? And generally with people, it's the head. You know, the body is so many heads tall. I forget what it is, like 6 heads tall or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I don't retain these things. I just kind of observe. Because I think also retaining too much of this stuff also tends to make drawings look pretty rigid, you know? It's good to have those rules like in the back of your mind, because then you can kind of fall back on something like that, especially when drawing from imagination. Like, why isn't this figure working? Well, your proportions are bad, unless that's something you meant to do. But, you know, you generally measure everything in the context of like, well, how big is the head? You know, the torso is so many heads wide. For the head, you can even go into the eyes. The eyes are the anchor point for the head. So like, you know, there's generally an eye, and then an eye's length, and then another eye, you know. So you can break that down as many ways as you want. So now we're going to go do the brim, a little bit of the baseball cap. And again, not go out too far, but just far enough to where we can start curving it in if we need to. Or we can take it a little further out if we need to. You want to give yourself in the future as much freedom of choice, you know, as possible. You don't want to get too locked in on these things until it's necessary. And then this is where we have a bit of the hair kind of coming up over where the hat is. And then this kind of, by contrast, goes back some more. You know, one of the things I always notice is when I'm overworking one area, it's time to go to another area. So now we're going to make a little bit of a bold choice. We know some of the hair comes out back here. And this is where you can kind of do those interrupting lines, because you can always solidify them later. You can't come back and make them not interrupted. And then we might have to make a little bold choice here, because we also have the guitar coming up at about this angle here, but I'm not entirely sure yet. I think this comes down a little bit below the chin first. Yeah, so we got the chin here. That comes across. Got a nice head of hair there, Twin Toasters. Very good. And let's see. So this was definitely part of the rim of the hat. And then so yeah, we can start curving this in about right here. I think that was a pretty good guess. And then a lot of these lines, like these kind of guess lines that I end up not using, will kind of get disguised as like these, you know, value kind of contour hatching lines. So like, you know, this isn't going to be completely in light, but it's also not the darkest thing on the photograph here. So we can kind of start coming in a little bit. Kind of form the shape of the shadows. Okay, that's not bad. I'm into that. And then the highlight on the hat comes right on the edge of the brim. So we don't want these lines connecting to the brim, because there's a harsh highlight right there, which is why I think we kind of need these like mid-ground lines here. Which again, if you keep them far apart and you kind of break them up like that, you can always come back, draw more lines in between them, connect the lines you have. I think what I might do is connect some of these and then draw a few closer to here, because it definitely kind of lightens up in this area here. If anything, this might be a little bit too tall, but you know what? It's going to be one of those eccentricities in the drawing that I think once you get the rest of it in, it's not going to be super noticeable, but it'll be noticeable enough to give. One of the things I like about these pen drawings is there is a little bit of a wonkiness to it, because not all of these guesses are going to be right or exactly right. This kind of comes down like that. So yeah, hopefully that reads as a baseball cap. And we'll leave some of the details out there. We'll come back to those later. So I gotta do more of this microphone stand. And then this is where some of this gets a little unclear, but with that unclarity, we know the hair kind of coalesces there. How much of this is shadow and how much is hair, I couldn't tell you, but I think as long as it kind of ends up with like this kind of mid-ground, and we get a nice little harsh line under here that's coming right up there. Yeah, this is going to be the trouble spot here. And you can kind of tell, like, you start kind of dancing around the areas you're trying to avoid. But as much as it is an act of avoiding it, it's also like you're searching for more context to kind of make a better decision when you do eventually have to contend with it. Because you can't run from it forever. It's one of those things where if you're going to draw this thing, you're going to have to, at some point, contend with these areas that you're not entirely sure about. There's nothing wrong with searching for a little bit more context. You know, nobody's rushing you on this drawing. It's just the time that you want to take on it. And again, if you're drawing from a photograph, you can always pick up and take a break and go do something else for a bit. You know, you're not married to it. And we're also doing it because we enjoy it. At least I would hope we are. It'd be nice to get paid for stuff like this, but we'll see if that's down the line in the future. We're not going to worry about that for now. Right now, it's just me and the drawing and the photograph reference here. So what I'm doing now is, again, I'm still avoiding that area because I feel like I need to. But I'm going to adjust some of this contrast on here because I feel like we're kind of free to do that now. And there's a lot of like really harsh shadows in here that I think, again, will kind of give this drawing some charm. You know, just like as long as you pay attention to the contours and the directions your line are going, you only want to maybe pick 2, 3, 4 directions for your lines to go. So that way it stays nice and organized and doesn't look overworked or anything like that. You want to look like you worked on it, but we don't want it to look overworked, which with this area here is definitely a trap we can fall into. And I'll let you guys decide if you think it's overworked, because I mean, I have my own opinions on it, which I'm trying to articulate as much as possible out loud in this video for y'all's benefit. But if you disagree, definitely hit me up, man, in the comments. Let me know what looks overworked to you, and what, if you saw me misstep as far as, you know, where I placed a line or where I should have left an area alone. Let me know. I'm open to critique. That's why I put this stuff on the internet. You know, if you're just going to say it sucks, I mean, that's fine too. But I kind of don't regard those opinions. But give me a nice, honest critique on this too. I'm always open to, you know, what people's process is and what they would think of my process. Because I think with that sort of dialogue is how you kind of improve on your craft. You don't necessarily see everything that everybody else is going to see in your drawing. There we go. See, I think that's a fair amount of value to kind of fake a three-dimensional kind of, you know, looking at the face in the round. Because it coalesces to here where we have our highlight. We got some texture on here that's going to also kind of act as a little bit of value for us. And then we can kind of bring some of these contour lines around to kind of taper off some of this value and let it go into like kind of a lighter area of contrast. And that ought to do it for that. Okay. So now we come down here. Let's draw a couple more flares and see where they take us, starting with the hair here. And that kind of comes out like so. And then we have that. Then where does this? Let's see, the corner here, and that leads down to the corner. So this would be about the corner of the guitar right here, I would imagine. You can always do a little anchor point dot too. And then now we're gonna get a little bold. We know about the angle that this is gonna come out at. That's because it's gotta come up to meet this here about. But we also have some hands right about here. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna start at this angle, which is about the corner of the neck of the guitar and where the body of the guitar meets. We're gonna kind of travel that up. Whenever you're doing a straight line, you want to kind of lock your wrist and draw more from the elbow. If you do from the wrist, you can get a straight line like I'll do one here, but it's more curved, you know, or you can do a little straight line. But if you lock your wrist and just kind of move your whole elbow, you can kind of go a little bit longer of a distance. It's not going to be 100% straight, but again, like it's that kind of eccentricity that shows what I'm interested in is all these little teeny tiny moments of observation and how they add up to, I don't know, again, like this artifact of a time where you were just kind of locked in and you were not only looking at something in front of you and relating to it, but you're also having to relate to yourself in a way. Because it's this synergy that's kind of created between you and the subject, the object, you know, if that makes any sense. Which is why if you follow me on social media or whatever and you like the comic stuff, I would urge you, if you like drawing, to just also set up a still life, you know, and try to draw what's in front of you. There's it's a very challenging thing, but I think it's also one of those things, the only ways you can kind of improve your craft is working from observation as much as it is like, you know, looking at other artists you like. But I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. You know, don't do one without the other. Always, I guarantee you, any artist you like started out at the basics, drawing from observation. And here's something I could kind of, based on the hand, See, we can kind of fake things like that because there's going to be areas of light and shadow. You're not even going to notice something like that unless you saw me kind of make that mistake, which I guess you all did, but that's okay. There's always going to be mistakes in drawing. Always, always, always. And I bring this up every time I can, but on Brandon Graham's old podcast that he had with his buddy Farrell Dalrymple, sorry if I'm saying his name wrong. It's called 100 Years. I don't know if you can get it anywhere anymore. I haven't been able to see it since I listened to it during the pandemic or whatever. But there's one episode they did on Mobius, and they were talking about some quote he had about like when he makes mistakes, and both of them couldn't fathom that Mobius makes mistakes. There's no way. But Mobius's philosophy to that some sort of thing is that, like, well, if you make a mistake in a drawing, it's now your job to make it look cool. In other words, make it work within the context of what you've put down and the decisions you're going to be making around that mistake, you know? Drawing can be a very redemptive kind of thing in that way, which is, I don't know, one of the reasons I like it. Even in a kind of no take-backs kind of situation I've put myself in by drawing straight with pen here. All right, so we know this is whereabouts that happens. We have the body of the guitar kind of coming in here and maybe curving it down a little bit there. And then this area here is where the guitar kind of curves up and around. And we're going to try to capture this. So this is a pretty harsh dive here. So we're going to try to capture that. But it doesn't turn around completely. It still kind of follows the angle of this. And then we have some area of value we have to fill in here. And kind of one of the benefits with cross-hatching is it allows you to almost immediately go pretty dark in some areas and then kind of leave these lighter areas of lines, and it creates this illusion that it's like kind of blending. I guess I didn't do it so well there, but that's okay. This is kind of a darker area anyway. There's a lot of, like, not a lot of times will these things actually blend. I think a lot of the, like, not every shadow is going to blend into like a, what do you call it? A gradient of like light. So right here, I'm just kind of drawing the shape of this shadow because it's, again, it's just a harsh shadow that we can kind of use that is coming from the guitar. And if we do the direction of the line in such a way, you don't have to do too much contour on this. We have a little bit of this kind of ending here. We just want this to recede a little bit for now. We can always go darker later. Or sometimes it's even fun to like kind of leave these things kind of their odd, you know, with this odd like kind of line work in there that makes it recede, but it looks like, you know, makes it look a little bit more like a process drawing, which I think, you know, process is, much like any art, I think process is important. And it's something to consider because it also determines what your final piece is going to look like. And process is anything from deciding the materials you're going to use, how you're going to approach the drawing with those materials, like all of it is process. And one of the things I like about drawing is kind of this like chance with my choice of materials, you know, as much as I'm like looking at what I'm drawing and trying to as accurately represent it as I possibly can, there's a chance I'm not going to see it right. There's a chance that I'm going to kind of break my concentration. Like right now I'm talking a lot, and that's not something I normally do when I'm drawing. And kind of trying to adjust my process to include the talking kind of threw me off a little bit at the beginning, but I don't think it was so much so that there's not something that we can't use from this, you know, at least as far as YouTube is concerned and all the stuff you kind of have to do to get your work in front of people. And then we can kind of, this isn't really an area of highlight here, so we can kind of do these like kind of, I call them Mobius lines, because whenever you do a drawing, you don't want to do exactly straight lines. I know I did a bunch of straight-ish lines here, but I wasn't too careful in making them straight. But I always like to do like these little S kind of lines, because a good rule of thumb, especially when drawing, sorry, just read the text from my wife there, is that, like, especially when drawing people, there's not really a straight line on the body. So if you ever have to like kind of guess with like some sort of contour, you can kind of fake it a little bit, and it kind of just becomes this like stylistic way of representing like this area here in particular. I was talking about being a little unsure of like what's happening here, because we have a lot of hair coalescing here, and we also have just kind of a mid-ground. I guess there's like a button here too we can kind of riff off of, but so this area is going to be a little bit, we're not sure of what's happening, but I think as long as you get the value right, it doesn't matter exactly what's happening in there, you know? You just kind of, again, you just want to make it look cool within the context of your drawing. You want to make sure it looks fit and it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. Because that's when people will be like, well, what happened here? Like, all this is good, but what happened over here? Which, you know, as the person who's drawing it, I'm always going to know that's the case, but I also don't want people looking at it to be like, so nobody's going to really look at this that closely, you know? They're not going to be thinking the same things that you're thinking when you were drawing it, because you were so invested in every little line from moment to moment, which again is kind of the beauty of drawing. It's just these series of decisions and series of moments that all kind of add up to this like physical artifact of, you know, evidence that you were present and you paid attention to something and you did your best, not only to observe, but to understand, because you synthesized, you know? And I think synthesis is an important way of being able to show, well, I mean, I'm sure that's probably a rule somewhere, but I don't know, I'm not too well versed on stuff like that, but it seems to me that being able to synthesize something shows that you understand a concept, or you understand the thing that you're trying to learn or trying to observe or trying to, whatever it is, interact with. Dark contrast on the hat. This kind of shadow that juts up. And then, so watch what I'm doing here. See, I start with these thick lines, and then there's, as this gets closer to the brim, it gets darker. So I just go in with lines in between those lines and darken it up. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Just trying to keep in mind that the hat has a specific shape. Don't keep in mind that it's a hat. It's just a specific shape where all these lines are following the folds, the creases, it's a map for you to look at. It's like he's got a stain on this head here. Yeah, I got hats with stains on them too. That means it's they're well loved. You know, my Papa Jazz hat has all kinds of sweat stains on it because I use it to. I usually wear it when I mow the lawn or do yard work and stuff. But that just means I love that hat. It's a good hat. It's durable, you know. It stands up to me sweating all over it. Papa Jazz is a local record store for anybody not in Columbia, or if you're not familiar. If you are in Columbia, you should go check them out. They got a good selection. They pack a lot in the little bit of space that they have there, but as I understand it, they've been there for quite a while down in 5 Points. Good store, helpful staff, good selection. And they support their local musicians. You could probably get these guys' tapes there too if you're local and you're so interested. So this is another one of those things where I can kind of use the direction of the hat. So this area might end up looking a little strange, but that's okay. And there's something strange about this area here. I think it's just like a contrast thing. I mean, that'll work. It looks kind of like he's wearing a hat. I think I'm messing this up a little bit, but that's okay. Again, this could just be one of those eccentricities that wind up in the drawing and kind of give it a little bit more charm. And again, we're not going for photo realism. We're just pen to paper, looking at something and reacting to it. That's all. You want to talk about like what is drawing. As much as it is like this series of moments, it's what's happening in this series of moments is a reaction. And I'm going to make an artistic decision and probably stop the guitar around here. We'll see. I mean, I can always pick it back up because I don't want to, be honest, I don't want to draw these individual strings and stuff. Because that's not the important part of the drawing anyhow. There's kind of this backing for the neck, kind of curves in about right there, juts out a little. This is an odd shape. And that kind of goes a little bit like so. And this goes a little bit in the dark, so we can kind of hide that a little bit. And then what is missing from here is the back of the guitar neck. How far up does this go out of the hair? Probably about like so. I think that's the correct angle. And then this part of the head of the guitar kind of recedes into shadow, but there's a suggestion of the angle. I think that dips down a little bit. And then this is a little bit more definitive. So we can kind of more or less follows this angle, but also tapers out a little bit. It's at a little bit more. So this goes like this, it goes a little bit more like that. Probably because the head of the guitar widens a little bit. And then we're doing that so that way we have an idea of where the shoulder comes out, which is about right here. And we can draw that pretty harsh because the background is pretty dark, and as long as we fill in that background, we also have the keys here. I think they're called keys. You know, the little things you turn to tune the guitar. I believe they're called keys. It's been a minute since I've played guitar. I really need to get back into it. I used to love it when I was in high school. I wasn't ever like super good at it, but I could play a few bits and pieces of a few songs. I think I got more distracted by the gear and stuff than actually like playing it, which is probably why I fell out. It's not a collecting gear is not a hobby you want to get into because that's expensive, and then you're just like hoarding a bunch of gear. But some people like that. Some people are real gearheads, and some people like get into that as like a hobby of like, oh, let me tweak this, or let me start making my own gear and stuff like that, which is cool. I don't have the capacity for that type of thing. It's electronics or something, much like a lot of things that I just don't fully understand. I kind of just take for granted that they work, and if they don't work, then I'm kind of lost. So this might look a little strange because we're just kind of just mapping out the shape, and we can be a little harsh here because there's a harsh shadow that comes from under here, and then about right here is where the cast shadow actually, so we could probably start drawing that in a little bit. Right there, the cast shadow of his arm. So it's gonna look a little strange for a little bit until we get some of that value in. All right, give me a second here. I gotta use the restroom. All right, I'm back. Sorry about the break there. All right, so we were drawing this shoulder. But this could also become a part of the drawing, like I was talking about before, that maybe you don't finish it out and you kind of just let these lines be. You know, sometimes that's fun to do and experiment with things like that. And then this kind of comes in like so, because he's got his sleeve a little bit rolled up here. We just have like these various folds that we can kind of map. And you'll notice I'm working a little bit faster here. At some point, and I don't know, I've never kind of figured this out. It's either, I feel like I'm rushing the drawing, but at the same time I'm not, because I'm still looking. But I think I just want to get these things like mapped out so that way I'm eliminating a lot of this big guesswork. You know? It's just kind of time to make that decision, and then you kind of just look and observe and trust yourself that like you put down enough information to make a decision, as long as you're looking back at your reference and looking back at what you have and all that fun stuff. And then I'm just trying to adjust some of this contrast in here because it's a little too samey. And this gets a little bit more mid-groundy here, so we could probably just do some like mid-ground kind of hair stuff happening with a little bit of contrast. Little shapes of contrast in the middle here. What time is it? 12:50. Oh, I'm gonna have to eat some lunch soon. So maybe we don't do the full drawing on here because I think I've talked through enough of this. Or maybe this is the full drawing, who knows? I'm just kind of using this as an example of like how I approach these things. We'll fill in as, you know, I'm not super hungry right now. I just made some chicken over the weekend. Chicken drumsticks, and they came out very good. And I want to eat one. Here's that big one here, and then now we have, and this is kind of the area of the photo too, where we have, it's kind of a little bit flat other than these like couple of areas of high contrast where, you know, you get folds of the fabric as the light hits it, but most of it is pretty flat as far as value is concerned. So this is an area where you definitely can fall into the trap of overworking it, I think. But I think as long as you keep your lines conservative, don't group them together too closely, because the farther apart, the less, harsh the value is going to be. The closer together, the more dense your value is, the deeper the shadow. And in my rule of thumb is if the value is bold enough to just draw a line to kind of map out the direction that it's going in, you're probably okay putting some close together lines on there. And then kind of working those areas in between that as you kind of finish them. It's like this one here actually kind of goes from like a mid to like not a highlight, but again, it's just flat is what it is. So you kind of want to just like show that it's not super bright, but you also don't want to go too harsh with it here. There's another area we can kind of do that with. We want that to recede a little bit behind the hand, but not too much. I mean, not too much, but some areas we can kind of fake stuff like that. Like if you need to up the contrast to make something recede a little bit, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with anything you do if you have any sort of justification in a drawing. Whether or not you achieved what you're trying to do is another thing, but I think that's where critique can be helpful, because, you got to be honest with the final result versus what was in your head. But then we also tend to be our harshest critics. So it's always worth showing it to somebody and saying, just what do you think? Don't ask them any leading questions. Just what do you think? Is there any areas that you would say I should work on? Are there any areas that I did really well? I mean, that's the other thing with critique. There should always be that second half to it. You don't want to just focus on the things that you got wrong, but you want to focus on the areas you did get correct, because it's important to retain those good moves and then also keep in mind the choices you could have made, in a particular drawing when approaching the next one, and you come across those similar trouble areas again. For like this one, I think what I'm going to do is like kind of do these like contoury lines that kind of follow it up from here, and maybe cross hatch a little bit of these, and then have like the cutoff point maybe be like right about here. Okay, yeah, see, that kind of works. And again, all else fails, contour, contour. Contour is key. Your direction of line is kind of what's doing a lot of the visual trickery. I did hit record on that again, didn't I? Okay, I did. That's what's going to be doing a lot of your visual trickery and leading the eye from a place of where these things recede to where they kind of expand out into the open. And then he's got some looks like deer on his button-down shirt, but we're not going to really pay attention to that. It does kind of create these areas of differing contrast, but we're going to try to keep that as abstract as possible, because we don't want to mistake the decal or whatever for like a fold, because that's, again, it's not super important what's on his shirt. It's just, is he wearing some sort of material? Is it reacting to the light in the way that it, just by its nature, in the way that it lays down or folds? So you always come back to these areas too and just kind of spruce them up a little bit too. There's nothing wrong with kind of going back to a comfort area, but you don't want to overwork it. Don't want to overwork it, But you got to give yourself a little bit of a break because we're looking pretty hard over here. Again, this is something we can kind of cross hatch and get a little bit harsher as it gets closer to the fingers. And then this one, because it kind of comes up, we don't want that hatch line to come to the edge of the border of the finger there that we've established. We want, because there's a little bit of a highlight here, so we want to make the darkest that we're going to go just before it. Just before it. And then this kind of comes up here. Excellent. Beautiful. See, that all kind of works out. And then we have a little bit of a shadow here. So how we're going to handle this so it doesn't get lost is we're going to just do it at a different angle here. So that way it doesn't look as much part of the finger as it could. And then this part of the finger also really recedes in the shadow. Then he's got a knuckle here, but we're not keeping in mind that it's a knuckle. It is just a shadow. It is a shape that is being created by the bone kind of protruding out. Not protruding in a gross way, but just in the way that like a knuckle kind of protrudes from the skin and creates kind of that topography of the hand. We got a knuckle here, and it kind of dips. I'm only saying knuckle because it's a good reference point for you guys watching me. You know, reality, I'm not really thinking of these things as a knuckle. I'm just like, oh, it dips here, so that means it needs to get, you can see it gets a little darker. And then this kind of comes around and meets this here. And we have this other area of dark right there. And then we can kind of connect them with that. And we won't go all the way to the edge, but right about where the wrist starts is where we can start going towards the edge. And again, just you want to keep in mind that it is turning around here. Like the wrist continues on the other side of this. So to do that, you don't want to just do a straight line because it flattens it. You want to follow the contour. So you're going to go up, curve in, up, curve in. We're going to do that probably in one direction and then hatch in the other direction. And it also, as we're doing it, it kind of fixes this line. And as it overlaps this line, it creates this area of dark where there's going to be a shadow here and then there's a strong shadow here, at least on the wrist. And then here, the strong shadow is more on the body, which it kind of comes like that. So now we got a nice little map for, we got like this two-toned shadow here. And this is where it gets fun. You can kind of play with stuff like this. And it becomes more of a stylistic choice that's kind of being informed by the shadow. You know, you can make these lines however you want. This is just kind of how I've fallen into doing it. Just by looking at artists that I like and then trying to figure out what it is about the quality of their line that I like and then doing my best to kind of emulate it. And that's pretty much it, you know? You learn by looking not only at what it is you're drawing, but also by looking at like, well, how do the art that I like, how do they handle these similar situations that I find myself in as I'm drawing. And oftentimes it comes from just looking at, I don't know, I mean, the masters, I guess, whoever is, you know, kind of your mold that you're trying to replicate here. Myself, I come from I like to draw. I've loved comic books since I was a kid, but like when I got in high school, that's when I discovered like Frank Miller and Robert Crumb, and those things just kind of stuck with me every time I put pen to paper, because every time I would see something new by them, it was like, well, not necessarily Robert Crumb, but he's just got such a wealth of, you know, material that it just kind of, you kind of figure out, and like a breadth of stuff too. Like he does very cartoony things, but then he also does these like really beautiful portraits of like bluesmen and stuff. And I think I always look for the Venn diagram of what's in common between his more loose kind of cartoony, and I wouldn't call his portraits rigid because there's definitely a looseness to them, but like what is the common theme, I guess, between these two, and like these visual kind of like cues or eccentricities, I think is probably the best word for it, that just kind of subconsciously come out onto the paper. And it's just basically just informed by the way, by process, by the way you figured out how to do something. Okay. Now this is pretty light right here, but there's a little bit of shadow there, so we can kind of get away with that. And then I think if we kind of follows that, but then it just kind of dives a little bit. Oops, that's all right. And then this kind of a, not as dark as the other shadow here, but we can kind of follow this, kind of contour around and make these two things kind of coalesce into one. I think what this might be is the guitar strap, because that's pretty damn dark right there. So let's just go ahead and darken that. That way we're not constantly wondering what is going on right there. We'll just go ahead and make a decision right now to darken that. It's a, you know, again, I always talk about being conservative, but at some point, the conservative moves become a little bit more bold because you have no other choice but to kind of establish an anchor, you know, something that's going to inform the contrast or the shape or whatever it is around it. We're always looking for those points, for points of reference that we can take with us that are referencing our other points of reference that we've been laying down this entire time. But whether drawing from observation or drawing from imagination, you know, I don't do a lot of just straight off the dome imagination drawings. I'm working up to it, but the ones I have done, I noticed that there's kind of that through line in it, and I'll take a little bit more time with the stuff from imagination. Like, for example, I did this Batman drawing in the span of an evening and a morning. I drew you know, a certain amount of it and just kind of hit a wall. And I was like, you know, we'll get the rest later. And then later that night, I was looking at, you know, I always take process shots too, so I can kind of see how it develops. And I was looking at them and I was like, oh, I think I have an idea for how to finish this out and how to handle a couple of things. So these things come from like not drawing and kind of considering. And in the case of the imagination, you're more looking within your mind's eye rather than looking out at anything specific, unless you're using a reference photo, you know, to get some sort of specific, like this oddly specific thing incorporated into your drawings from imagination, which is like always good. If you can use a reference photo, I think, to approximate, you don't want to copy, because again, it has to look like it is a part of your composition. Yeah, this is good. So we want a little bit of variation in there. And then this comes off of here. We have this here. So we got some variation. And oh yeah, that is a guitar strap. How about that? Because that's the loop there. That kind of goes up. And then this is like a fold in the shirt. That kind of... So we might get a little bit lost in the sauce here, but that's all right. Generally, we just kind of want this to be contrasted from what's supposed to be in front of it. So like the hand, which I guess we don't want to go too dark here. And luckily there's a pattern on his shirt here that we can kind of lean into as far as like value. But it does create kind of a lighter value because the pattern on the shirt, I guess the printing is lighter than the shirt color. So we can kind of lean into that a little bit and also distinguish between the things just with the direction of line as well. So that, we'll leave that alone for now. That's fine. And then come down past the hair, that comes up a little bit, and then we have a little bit of the thumb here. A little bit of the thumb's in motion, so we got a little bit of a blur effect here. So we can kind of just like maybe not draw so many harsh lines for this. We can just kind of hatch it out in value, you know, and then we have something a little bit more solid to hang on to right here. And then if I was to continue to draw this, this is about where the microphone stand comes up. So you can see, like, I'm all the way down here, but something I did up here is kind of informing what I have down here. So whenever I notice something like that, I always pause, decide whether or not I need to marry those two parts together, which sometimes is a good idea. Sometimes it's fine to just leave it alone. But it could kind of help to establish, again, more of our proportions. And then the fun thing about these drawings is that, like, even the little bit that you're off with the proportions at the beginning, at some point the drawing starts to take on, like, what I like to call speed wobbles. And then, you know, that's kind of where the drawing stops, because if you keep going, it's just going to get more and more out of control. Oh, this is nice. So we got a really nice dark shadow here, and this kind of comes up here. So almost all of this is going to be in black, minus a couple of shapes here and there. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. We can kind of kayfabe these, we can fake these shapes a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. Because I think the important thing is that a lot of this shoulder here is receding into shadow. Okay. You can have a lot of this kind of come up, and that works just as well. All right, we'll finish this up in a few minutes here, because now I am starting to get hungry. I said those chicken drumsticks out loud, and now I think my belly heard me. So I'll do my best not to rush this, but I am getting hungry. It's kind of has a little bit of a highlight right here. So we'll just do enough to kind of give this body the illusion of being in the round here, so it doesn't look as flat. And then maybe we'll just make this line on the microphone stand kind of the cutoff line for all of that, if that makes any sense. So again, like these drawings always take on like an odd shape, I think. But I think that's part of the fun of it. And yeah, I think I want to get a little bit of this kind of receding too, because it goes in the round and there's a we'll kind of abbreviate the strumming hand because it is in motion. We can get away with a little bit of that. But we just want to get the general kind of shape. And that kind of comes in and comes up like so. All right. So we got like this knuckle, kind of a lighter area there. All right, so it's going to be kind of an abstract shape for the hand, but that's okay. I mean, yeah, I guess you could say I'm kind of rushing this end here because I'm getting hungry. And again, this is one of those things where like normally I probably would have taken a break at some point in this drawing and come back to it later. Probably would have benefited the drawing, but that's okay. Let's put a little bit of value on this guitar here because I don't like how light it is. It just kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. And we don't want stuff to stick out for reasons we don't want, you know? Ultimately, we are in control of that to an extent. Yeah. You know, we'll call it here. I'm fine with that. I kind of like how this sticks out, even though I just got done saying I don't like it. The microphone kind of takes on that same quality. So there's a, I guess I set the precedence without even thinking about it. But yeah, twin toasters at the New Brooklyn Tavern. There you have it. If you don't already, please like and subscribe. Please check me out on Instagram. Please buy my comic, Gut and Ghost. Link's in the description. My Shopify. I'll ship it to you with a sketch on the back, personalized with your name on it, thanking you for your purchase. Or if you want a digital copy, PDFs are available, and with that you also get the page layout, so you can print your own bootleg Gut and Ghost if you would still prefer to have a physical book in front of you. But printing costs are on you for that. But yeah, thank you so much for stopping by. Later.